It's an old trick of Adolf Hitler's. Welcome, folks. First thing I'd like to do this evening is acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders and the traditional owners of the land where we are tonight. I'd like to welcome all of our distinguished, Indigenous guests that are here tonight from various places around the country, different mobs. I'd like to welcome all of you to this, the inaugural public meeting of the Black GST. The first thing to be said about the Black GST is that it is not the latest lunatic economic rationalist plan of Noel Pearson.
Thank God!
The Black GST began life as a year or so ago as essentially a discussion group and Indigenous Tucker Appreciation Society. I must say that I was first attracted by the food. We've got one of the best cooks of kangaroo that I've ever come across in Australia, Mr. Targan down here. Normally I must say that I've never been all that into kangaroo, being a follower of Bruce McGuinness and thereby a kangaroo supporter. Bruce McGuinness wouldn't even allow kangaroo to be served on the menu at my wedding a few years ago when he was still alive. So from humble beginnings as a discussion group and a good food mob, it quickly became apparent anywhere in Australia, as we speak right now, wherever any group of blackfellas come together, talk inevitably turns to the discontent and the disaffection felt at where we seem to have arrived at this point in history. It's got to be said that with the current political situation, whereby both of the major political parties, which are indistinguishable in so many ways anyway, both political parties who are likely to ever form government in Australia at this moment are extremely anti-Aboriginal in their policies, in their Indigenous policies. This necessarily leaves Aboriginal people in a state of political limbo. The language being used by both major political parties in terms of Indigenous stuff is very much the sort of language that those of us who are old enough and those of us who are older will remember is the language of assimilation. In many ways, John Howard not only wants to take Australia culturally back into the 1950s, politically in terms of Indigenous policies, he's most certainly taken us at least back that far and probably further. In 1967, a significant moment in Australian history, the extent of support for Indigenous rights was such that in the only definitive public opinion poll ever conducted in this country amongst the broader Australian community, the 1967 referendum, in excess of 90% of Australians expressed the desire that Aboriginal people's rights should be addressed by the federal government. Successive federal governments since then have deliberately subverted the expressed wishes of the Australian people. Over the last 3 decades, we've seen the Labor Party in particular do double back flips, or double black flips if you like, in terms of policy. Remember that the silver bodgy, Bob Hawke, came to power not only proclaiming that no Australian child would live in poverty and such a date, he also declared loudly and longly that his government would deliver national uniform land rights legislation to Aboriginal people in accordance with, well, in line with the 1976 Northern Territory Land Rights Act, which enabled people to claim freehold title, the only meaningful form of land ownership under British law. That's what he promised us when he came to power. What did we have when the ALP left power 13 years later? We had this thing called native title, the most inferior form of land tenure under British law. And we had a Native Title Act which is so restricted in the possibilities for any Aboriginal group south of the Tropic of Capricorn winning a contested native title claim, essentially Buckley's a no. The Native Title Act in itself, as any of my students at Melbourne University will tell you, was in itself one of the greatest acts of dispossession since 1770. Native title is not land rights. Reconciliation, by definition, also is not justice. The struggle continues. The leadership of Black Australia, to a large extent, over the last 20 years, is effectively stands discredited today. Most especially the primary Indigenous architect of the Native Title Act, a certain gentleman from the north called Noel Pearson, who, if you read The Australian regularly like I do, I mean, I'm a big fan of the Murdoch media. It's important to know what the enemy's saying. And it's interesting to note that the enemy's favourite little pet Aborigine for the last couple of years has been the self-same Noel Pearson, the architect of the Native Title Act, the person who advocates these days that we bring Aboriginal kids from the north down to the fruit fields of Victoria, so that they go and pick fruit. That takes a couple of hours to earn $28, and that'll help teach these Aboriginal kids the value of money. This is the talk, this is the language of assimilation two-faced. If you want to interfere with the basic cultural values, the basic value systems of Indigenous people, you are talking assimilation. And never forget, assimilation equals genocide. Simple. That's all it is. If Aboriginal people were fully assimilated, there would be no Aboriginal people. That's always been what assimilation means. And yet, mainstreaming, as spoken by John Howard and his crew these days, equals assimilation. Mainstreaming equals assimilation. Assimilation equals genocide. Hence, the Black GST. The genocide must stop. Sovereignty must be acknowledged. And a treaty must be made. Indigenous people must gain land. Through gaining land, achieve economic independence. Through gaining economic independence equals self-determination, black control of black affairs. So, here we are. I've got to keep looking around because I forgot what I wrote in this thing. At this moment in history, it's important to remember that ever since 1938, Indigenous people have taken the opportunity of reminding not only Australia but the world of the failure to resolve the oldest historical dispute in this country. In 1938, activists such as William Cooper, Jack Patton, Bill Ferguson, Bill Onus, Pearl Gibbs, Marge Tucker and others challenged the occasion of the 150th anniversary of white settlement and declared a day of mourning. And effectively since 1938 there has been a constant contest over the 26th of January. To all Indigenous people in Australia since 1938, well, for 200 years, it's been Invasion Day. To white Australia, it's been Australia Day. The contest has reached a point where it is seriously suggested in the broader community that really the National Day of Celebration of Australia ought to be changed. That's a significant victory for Indigenous people slowly chipping away at the self-confidence of white Australia's assertion of their sovereignty over this place. In certain ways, I think the very controversial piece written by Germaine Greer a few months ago is not a bad analysis. At the end of the day, if you think about it, for 200 years white Australia has tried to assimilate us to become like them. And yet if you think about it, folks, slowly but surely, and as sure as the sun comes up tomorrow, blackfellas are bringing you around to our way of thinking. And blackfellas are slowly but surely, it may take a few more generations, or even if it takes 5 more generations, don't matter, inevitably, people who live in this land and this landscape are coming to realise that they need to be assimilated into our way of thinking, our way of doing things, our values. At this moment in time with John Howard advocating a brutal, nasty, evil, selfish society, it's more important than ever that people consider the Indigenous values of care, caring and sharing, the basic ethos of I am my brothers and sisters' keeper, the notion that the welfare of the group is more important than the welfare of the individual. These are Indigenous qualities and values that Australians must embrace, more so now than at any time in the past, in the new world order that we've got now. So folks, the Black GST is about tossing into the air an idea that, given the political situation that confronts us, shouldn't we consider looking around and seeing what's on the horizon that might represent an opportunity to remind all Australians and to remind the world that injustice lingers in this country. Aboriginal people still have not got land justice. Aboriginal sovereignty is still not recognised despite the Mabo decision declaring that the justification that they used for the acquisition of sovereignty in this country for 200 years was in fact the lie that we always said it was. So, scanning the landscape in the future, the Commonwealth Games represents an international event that just looks too good an opportunity to miss. On radio this morning, my close personal friend, John Fain, who was gracious enough on radio not to mention the essay that I've got on my website that I wrote about him 10 years ago, called "The Pain of Fame Goes Mainly to My Brain." John Fain this morning attempted to, like most, I expect most media will, attempted to get me to say that what the GST activity during the Commonwealth Games would be about is confrontation and disruption. I'd like to remind people on the occasion of the great masturbation of the nation in 1988, the same things were said in the lead up to 88. All sorts of accusations made. Aborigines are collecting guns, there's going to be violence, black power lunatics are going to disrupt the great bicentennial. Those of you around, know that the biggest march of Indigenous people in the 60 to 70,000 year history of Australia occurred on that day in Sydney. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Aboriginal people marched in dignity and challenged the great masturbation going on around them. And they say, well, some people say, that history isn't history unless it appears in the New York Times. Well, if that's the case, folks, we won the contest in 88. On page 2 of the New York Times, the entire half-page article about the great wank in Australia was devoted to the Indigenous people's march, the Indigenous people's claims, the Indigenous people's words. Yes. We won the bicentennial battle, and that's all we need to do here. Last Friday up at the museum, there were supposed to be 4 state government ministers turning up to the big announcement of the state government initiative, Indigenous initiative for the Commonwealth Games. Well, folks, a very small group of people from the Black GST turned up. And all we did was walk around in our t-shirts and had a couple of pamphlets. But the knowledge that we were going to be there, number one, stopped 2 of the ministers from turning up. Yay. The fact that we were there seemed to freak out a lot of people who were there. But what's their problem? What do they have to fear? What they've got to fear is simply the knowledge that there's a hell of a lot of blackfellas in communities all over Australia who are being fucked over and who are calling out for some sort of action a la the old days. No more the pinstripe suit brigades of the Noel Pearson and his company. Give me their little cabal and having secret negotiations with government. No more of the moron Mundines. Warren Mundine, one of the great opportunists of the last 100 years. When the ALP wanted 2 token vice presidents, they needed a token book and a token woman. They got Carmen Lawrence, which is appropriate. She was the one when she was Premier of Western Australia who introduced mandatory sentencing to Australia, which has put more blackfellas in jail than virtually any other thing ever since. So they got the token woman of Carmen Lawrence and the token bull. The nice little, safe, moronic, apparatchik, Aboriginal apparatchik, Warren Mundine. A coconut if ever there was one, folks. And I can say that because Warren Mundine's family and my family are part of the same family. We're very closely related. And I can confidently convey to you people tonight that Warren Mundine is very much the runt of the litter, the white sheep of the family. And it doesn't surprise me that so many blackfellas are so discontented and disaffected with what has laughingly been called the leadership of Black Australia for the last 10 years or so. People are screaming out for some sort of change in tactics. The stolen wealth games, and it must be said that the Black GST's resident wordsmith, Robbie Thorpe, is responsible for that. We're a pretty talented group. We've got a brilliant cook, brilliant wordsmith, an old token, has-been. So folks, tonight's all about, we're going to chuck some ideas at you. The speakers from the Black GST are going to each talk about, keep flipping through it, Claire. Each of the speakers from the Black GST are going to talk about different components, the Genocide Sovereignty Treaty. And at the end, we're just going to have a little bit of an open forum and let people say what they think and what they feel. At the end of the day, if there is to be some sort of spontaneous movement occurring nationally to focus on the Commonwealth Games, then tonight will be seen as its origins. Tonight we're looking for people, well, number one, if people think it's a good idea. Number two, we need people to help start organising, because if we are going to invite Indigenous people and their supporters from all over Australia to come to Melbourne for a big party during the Stolen Wealth Games, then that's going to take a lot of organisation, it's going to take a lot of resources. In the same way in 1982, when Joe Bajilki Peterson, who mercifully died recently, good riddance to bad stories. And the best part about it is I know that he's not in heaven, because there is no heaven. It will be a great disappointment for Joe. Anyway, folks, tonight's basically an extension of the discussion group that's been going for the last 12 months or so. We've invited you all because we need to know if there's people out there who are with us, and we need to know if there's people out there who are going to help us do this if we do it. Like I said at the beginning, the Black GST at this moment in time is just an idea that's floating around in this room. And to kick off the speakers tonight on the Black GST, they won't go on as long as I did.
That's a certainty.
And very quickly, first of all, I'd like to introduce you to one of the driving forces behind the Black GST, our host for most of the Black GST meetings, and the best, well, I can't say the best cookies, the proper cooks.
They're going to kill him.
Anyhow, the second best cook in the room, I'd like to introduce Target. Thank you.
Gary's already done the thank yous to the country and everything else. I guess I'm here to talk about the genocide, the ongoing struggle of my people. In 1947, the United Nations met, and at that meeting they agreed that genocide was against the law, world law. 38 nations were signatories to that first agreement. Part of that agreement was they went back to their countries of origin and they passed the law in that country against the crime of genocide. 37 nations did that by 1956, had laws against genocide. There was one missing. Do you need to guess who it was? It was Australia. Australia did not get a law against genocide until 2002. And thanks to a few staunch activists and a brilliant Queen's Counsel, We got a law passed in 2002 against the crime of genocide. Now, genocide is a strange law. It's not retrospective. So before 2002, there was no genocide in Australia. It didn't happen. My people weren't killed. There's no stolen generation, right? There's no health issues. We weren't experimented on. You know, no assimilation's taken place. There was no genocide. So, with that thought in mind, what you see behind you now is the acts of genocide coming up and what genocide entails. These acts in varying degrees have been perpetuated on my people since the first day of the invasion. And what I'm saying to you tonight is quite simply, and a pledge to you and all supporters of Black GST and to my compatriots and my friends, no more will I take a backward step. No more will I let my people go unanswered. And no more will I tolerate the genocide in this country. And you can say the same. As reasonable thinking human beings, you can say the same. Support the GST, get on our mailing list, sign up for volunteer work, buy a t-shirt, donate some money. Because now is the time to say no more. No more genocide. No more. No more. No more. No more.
No more. Thank you, Tiger. The next speaker from the Black GST group will be our resident wordsmith, and not only wordsmith, folks, a brother who has been involved in the struggle with me for longer than I can remember. Well, he's not quite as old as me, but ever since I've known him, since he was a young fella, he's been very much part of the struggle. He comes from an immaculate political lineage of people involved in the struggle, and everybody knows him anyway. I'd like to introduce my brother, Robbie Thorpe.
I'm not for words. This might give me the hardest question, sovereignty. I don't know if it is, but it's pretty hard to explain. Not really. Basically, it's about jurisdiction. Whose law? Usually, whoever's land it is, it's usually their law applies. But that's not the case in Australia. In this country, we have, it's our land, but we've got the law of England applies here. That's because the responsible sovereign, or the constitutional ruler of this land, is the Queen of England. We all know that, don't we?
Yes.
Do you know what the full name of the constitution in this country is called? The British Colony of Australia Constitution Act.
Boo.
Right? Now, sovereignty for Indigenous people is a God-given thing. It's a Dreamtime thing. It's Dreamtime creation law. No man ever made that law. No woman ever made the law. The Creators gave us that law. And we maintained that law since the beginning of time until the white man invaded our land. Brutally. Brutally invaded our land and basically exterminated 99% of the population here. Weapons of mass destruction were used on innocent people in a preemptive strike, namely smallpox. Now, after the smallpox takes its effect, usually about 20 years, there's 2 waves of it, wipes out about 90% of your population each time. That's when the white man came, in 1788, with his fleet of military ships. There's 1,000 Marines on that ship, and there was a cargo of disease on that ship. You know, that's not a peaceful settlement. When you stick your flag into someone else's land and claim it for your king, that's an act of war and aggression. There's been crimes committed, as Aboriginal people will say, since the white man arrived here. Crimes against humanity. Now, how do you derive ownership of property and the right to apply law if genocide is the reality here? If I stole something off a white fella and killed him, do I get to keep that property? No. That's called the proceeds of crime. In fact, your properties in this country is the proceeds of crime. A premeditated criminal genocide of the Indigenous people. Ongoing for 237 years. Tell me how you get sovereignty out of that. For me, America is a far more moral society than this country here. For one reason, they recognise the Indigenous people of their land and dig trees with them. It's written into their constitution. They recognise Indigenous sovereignty in America. Australia is way behind here. Way, way behind. It's a pariah state. It's built on the genocide of Indigenous people and the theft of our land. People are in denial of that fact. This is also the point about sovereignty. Now, Indigenous people surely don't have to explain how this is our land, do we? The point is, explain how it's yours. And the white man's pretty superior technologically. He can tell you what happened in the pyramids 2,000 years ago in great detail. You ask him a question about what happened here 150 years ago. Can't tell you nothing. He's a liar, he's a thief. This is what the country's built on. That doesn't give you sovereignty. The law has fundamentally changed in this country. In 2002, like Targan mentioned earlier, the law has fundamentally changed. It's called, you're not allowed to commit genocide here no more, and you're not allowed to be a terrorist no more. So that basically ends Australia's reign as far as I'm concerned, because that's what it's based on. What we need to do, and what should have happened in the first instance, when Cook was given instructions to get consent. People understand the meaning of the word consent, don't they? I ask all you women out there, do you understand the meaning of the word consent? It's a crime if they don't get consent. It's rape. They understand that issue. How come you don't understand it for Indigenous people? If 50% of this population is women, you can understand that fundamental legal issue. Well, surely they can recognise it for us too. The issues underlying in the GST are the fundamental legal questions that are unresolved in this country. That's the unfinished business. And we've got the Queen, the sovereign of you people, coming out here next year. It's a perfect opportunity for Indigenous people to sort this business out. Because we can't sort it out with a penal colony and whatever that's manifested into, we need to talk to the real sovereign. The people understand what sovereign law is, because it comes from there. The white man's corrupted his law, he's dehumanised his people, and he's dispossessed them for a long time. He's created this new world of colonised people and the destruction of the real world. It's all based on that, the colonised West world. It's got to stop. It's going to stop here. We never committed crimes against humanity like the white man does. We had domestic fights. Well, it wasn't over land. All these things were sorted out. All these things have been sorted out right across this planet. This is older than the white man's law. He's not so superior. He's proved himself. Look what he's done to our land in a short space of time. In Victoria, you've got the highest rate of extinction anywhere in the world in terms of mammals. Good job. Great farming, white fellas. You know how to look after land, do you? Well, because you've separated the rural people, the rural law, the caretakers, the people who've got an obligation to look after this land, because you've separated them and their customary law, their ceremonial practices, you're facing your own peril too, because you can't do that. There's only one law for this land. It's our law. Because we're the sovereigns. It's time that you recognise that. Stop living in denial. Denialism is a psychological problem. Maybe it's because you've all got vested interests in the stolen property that you've got. And surely you see the Aboriginal people walking around this country in the condition they're walking around in? Yeah? You ask any black fella, they'll tell you straight away it's their land. White man can't produce any documents of consent, a treaty, or any agreement. That makes it an invasion. People have got to question themselves, where do they stand in it? Are they the beneficiaries of this most heinous of all crimes? Yes, you are. You want to do something about it. Now, I'm preaching to the converted, who I'm very happy to see here. Now, this is very good for us, very heartening. Now, we've come to a hard time. I remember talking about these issues in Fitzroy 25 years ago. These were our issues. Genocide and sovereignty and a treaty. Where it's all been twisted and bent and turned around against us. But they're not going to get away from it this time. Like Tarkin said before, there's a new law in this country. It's called the Anti-Genocide Convention and the Anti-Terrorist Legislation. Laws that are going to stop this country in its tracks. Mark my words on that. Thanks.
I already feel better. I agree with Robbie. It is really heartening to be talking to a group like this tonight. It's been very disheartening in the last 10 years or so, as slowly but surely Indigenous rights have been even further undermined. We've been pushed even further back on the map. But it's really good, and I'm really pleased to see so many people here tonight, even though some of you probably did come courtesy of John Fame. And even though there probably is a contingent here tonight from the various groups, ASIO, the State Police, Minister for Aboriginal Affairs Office, would you people like to identify yourselves, please? I mean, always whenever I've been involved with a group like this, we can be guaranteed selling a certain percentage of t-shirts and getting a certain percentage of donations from our enemy, because they feel compelled to be here and know what we're up to. Which is good, it makes one feel wanted. The next speaker is someone who goes back a long way with me. I was just trying to think a moment ago about the first political action we were ever involved in together. And I think it was 1972 at a Brisbane anti-racism conference, where we also had the privilege of being hosted by my comrade down there, Dennis Walker. I'd like to pay tribute to Dennis Walker, mate. The reason why it's good to see Dennis here tonight, but the one that really appeals to me is that Dennis really did outlive Joe Bajoggi. My political mentor, the reason I came to Melbourne 33 years ago, who passed away 2 years ago, my comrade Bruce McGuinness, who was also a good friend of mine. Folks, to speak on the last of the three items tonight on the treaty, I'd like to introduce Marge Thorpe. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners and the elders of the country that we stand on. They have indeed survived. I'd also like to pay my respects to Dennis Walker, who we're very privileged to have here with us tonight, and as probably said, we've been on this struggle along this road a long, long time it seems. We're grandparents. And here we are still, fighting the same old struggle, saying the same old thing. And I think what you see from what's being said tonight, we're not saying anything new. We're saying the same thing, time and time again. Well, it's been over 30 years for me. And I hope that one day, and I don't think it'll be in my lifetime, that we see justice in this country. And it's good to see a group of people in this room tonight, such as yourselves, to come here and take the time out to listen to what we're saying and hopefully help us in this struggle. Because it is a struggle. Make no mistake about that. And I think as you get a bit older, it gets a bit harder to get around. But I think that what a testimony here today too is saying you just can't give up. You just can't stop saying what needs to be said. Because we live the genocide. Every single day of our life, we live the genocide. We see what goes on in our communities, in our families, our everyday life is what we're talking about. And you get tired of it. And it doesn't shock me today to hear the latest statistics, the latest lifespan for Aboriginal people in this country is less than 50 years for people who are born today. So you have to get up here, and as Foley said, 30 years ago I couldn't say anything, I was too shy. I couldn't get in front of a microphone. I remember Bruce McGuinness making me get up and say what I thought should be said. And I pay my respects to Bruce McGuinness, and I know that he's with us in spirit today. Part of the GST collective, and that's what we are. We're a group of people who think basically along similar lines about the issues that affect us in this country. And it is about GST, it's about genocide, it's about sovereignty, and it's about a treaty. As it's been said, genocide's been perpetrated on our people since the invasion of this country, day in and day out. And make no mistake, it's happening today. It's happening because our people are still subjected to second-rate services or no services. They're not recognised, they're not respected, they're discriminated against when they go to school, when they go to hospital. In every aspect of our lives, we are discriminated against. And why? Because this is a racist country.
That's right.
After 10 years of reconciliation, the bottom line was that we could not reconcile in this country because it is too racist. That is the bottom line. And so what's been done since then? We've been served up practical reconciliation. What the hell does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means assimilation.
Sorry.
It means mutual obligation. It means what Foley said about the leaders of today forcing down our throats or trying to, a government policy that we know is assimilationist. It's not the symbolic reconciliation. It's not the symbolic reconciliation that was determined through a declaration, as watered down and middle road that it was. It still outlined the unfinished business in this country. And yet this government could not face up to the truth of what the people in this country were saying.